3, 2, 1.
On the bench.
على البنش. We say على البنش usually, but today, because we have our first English speaker in our podcast, one of my teachers right now, and one of the people I look up to in the fitness industry, Mr. Mino. Hello.
Shukran, it's good to be here.
First of all, let's just give us a small introduction to you, because maybe some people who watch the podcast don't know you. So,
sure. I'm an international public speaker. I'm a scientist. I do exercise and nutrition research. I'm also an online coach, and I'm the founder of the Heinsleman's PT course, which is now getting over 1,000 students per year. And it's available in Dutch, English, French, German. We're talking maybe Arabic in the future.
Soon.
And Spanish. So that's going very well. And I'm a big proponent of evidence-based fitness and science-driven decision-making.
Okay, so let's dive into the subject of today. First of all, before we start, let's talk about what is the main driver for muscle building, because some people say it's muscle damage, some people say you have to damage your muscle, then they will grow. So what is the main driver for muscle building?
There's only one very well-established driver of muscle growth, and that's mechanical tension on the muscle, or the muscle fibers. And muscle damage and metabolic stress are alternative hypotheses that have been proposed that are in large part more a rationalization, I think, of the pump, the burn, and muscle soreness. Things that you can feel, which in my experience of having traveled to many parts of the world and having trained in many parts of the world, the bros in many places in the world, they actually train the exact same way. They train intuitively. So it's not cultural, it's intuitive. And I think we can very easily go wrong with exercise and nutrition when we make decisions based on our feelings rather than based on the facts and the science.
Okay. So most of the people will not know what is mechanical tension, what is metabolic stress, what is muscle damage. Can we just give a small definition of these?
Sure. Mechanical tension is essentially force output. When muscles contract, they form actin-myosin cross bridges, and this produces force. And tension and force are essentially the same thing. They should correlate approximately 100% in most scenarios. So the amount of tension on the muscle fiber is generally equal to the force it is producing. Now, there's also passive tension, which you can get by stretching a tissue to a certain length, especially if it's all under load. Then titin is also going to be spring loaded essentially, and also produces tension that makes the muscle get bigger. Now, muscle damage is more intuitive, although most people think it's caused mainly by wear and tear. The fiber produces tension and it ruptures, and that happens to some extent. But a lot of the muscle damage is actually caused by calcium, and it's chemical in nature. So it's more of an erosion from the inside out of metabolites that are being produced during the force production process. Not so much that the fibers are literally tearing like a band that's stretched too much, although that happens to some extent. Metabolic stress, the third one, is actually not well defined. There is no good definition of metabolic stress. It refers in general to the accumulation of metabolic byproducts and hypoxia. But there is no definition, it's not quantified. So it's impossible to say how much metabolic stress something is. And it's especially pertinent when it's unclear which metabolites are actually responsible for fatigue. So it was very long thought that lactate was responsible for fatigue and the burn. And lactate is strongly associated with metabolic stress of most kinds and the burn. But lactate itself is actually not a compound that produces neuromuscular fatigue. It actually buffers against it. And then hydrogen ion was thought to be a big component of metabolic stress and fatigue. And that's also turned to be probably not very true. And acidosis in general, which is what hydrogen ion causes, they're also getting a lower pH value and becoming more acidic, also doesn't really appear to have a strong influence. So now the hypotheses are centering on potassium, some other metabolites, calcium. So it's actually very unclear to what extent metabolic stress really causes fatigue and what exactly is going on. And that, I think, illustrates in large part with the problems of the metabolic stress hypothesis, that it's more of a feeling than a real quantified hypothesis. Now, muscle damage, for those wondering, we can actually quantify in an MRI scanner. For example, we can quantify the degree of edema. We can quantify the amount of certain metabolites that are produced, creatine kinase, for example. It's a very rough marker, or we can just simply look at the amount of recovery time until force production has increased back to baseline. So for muscle damage, we have some more better ways of actually quantifying it, saying, okay, this is this much muscle damage. Like with metabolic stress, what if there is a bit less oxygen, but there's also a bit less lactate? Is that more metabolic stress or less metabolic stress? Like, we can't really say at the moment.
Okay. Since you said the main, so we have three theories, like the mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. And you said the main one, and the one that we don't have a debate on, is the mechanical tension. So can we say the mechanical tension depends on volume, intensity, and load, these three things? And since the volume are really associated with the mechanical tension, can we say the volume is the main driver for muscle building?
Yes, definitely. We can say that, where we can take one step at a time. We can say that the amount of force production, which is correlated with training intensity, is very strongly correlated with mechanical tension. And then we can say we don't have a certain amount of mechanical tension, just that, but we also have the time under tension, and that is in large part equal to volume. Now, it turns out that if you're increasing the reps but decreasing the weight, that roughly equals each other out. So whether you're training with 60% of 1RM or 80% of 1RM, on average, those sets produce the same amount of muscle growth, because the heavier weights, they produce more tension, but for a shorter duration. And the lighter weights, they produce less tension, but for a longer duration. And in the end, the muscle reaches a similar fatigue point. So all the muscle fibers get recruited near the end of the set anyway, whether it's from the start or whether they first need to be warmed up with the first 10 reps of a 20 RM set, for example. In the end, you're going to recruit all the muscle fibers. All the muscle fibers are going to be subjected to mechanical tension if you're training close enough to failure. So we can say that the intensity, it doesn't matter so much as long as you're training close to failure. And indeed, volume is the key driver of muscle growth. Okay. The volume quantified here is in terms of number of sets per week per muscle group.
I have a question. So if we say 3x10, so 3 sets, 10 reps, 100 kg, and 10 sets, 3 reps, 100 kg, both of these will produce the same amount of muscle?
Roughly, yeah. It will depend a bit on the rest interval and the individual.
Okay.
But assuming it's a roughly equal effort as well, like it's equally difficult for the individual, you will produce indeed the same amount of muscle growth.
Okay.
And there are lots of studies that are similar to this on cluster set training and intra-set rest. And they generally find that if you have the same total work output, so sets times reps times weight, then you get equivalent muscle growth on average.
So we can't say there is a rep range for strength and rep range for hypertrophy and rep range for, let's say, endurance or something like this?
Well, not so much, no. It's more of a continuum. But if we had to designate a rep range for hypertrophy, it would probably be 5 to 30, roughly.
Okay.
Because the issue is if you go below 5 reps, then you don't produce enough time under tension. You get, if you're at roughly 80%, 80 to 85% of 1RM, then you get full muscle recruitment from the start. So all of the muscle fibers pretty much are gonna be active from the very beginning of the set. At that point, if you go even heavier, then you're not getting higher muscular recruitment anymore, but you are doing fewer repetitions. So you've sort of maxed out on the amount of tension that you can produce. Now, there's also an increase in rate coding, but it's minimal. So you've roughly capped out the amount of mechanical tension, but you are significantly decreasing the time under tension. If you do 4 instead of 5 reps, they're 20% less time under tension if all reps are the same length. So we see that if you're doing sets of 2 or 3, then if you're putting that against someone that's doing 10 RM or 15 RM training, then the 10 or 15 RM is going to get more growth. But if you do more sets to compensate, so you do say 5 sets of 2 instead of 3 sets of 10, then you're probably also going to get equivalent growth again.
One of the questions that we always get asked when we talk about main drivers for hypertrophy is that, is the pump, like feeling the pump, which all the bros chase, which we also one of them, because the pump feels good, right? Is the pump one of the drivers as well? Or is there a correlation between having more pumps in the gym and building more muscles?
Basically none. So the pump is very much, it's correlated with metabolic stress. And it subjectively, intuitively, it feels good. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger said the pump is better than. And that's what I think drives a lot of the bro culture. If people train intuitively, they're training for these things, because if you do a set of 8, maybe you feel the muscle working, but if you do a set of 15 or 12, you get a better pump, so you feel more. Well, if you don't have any research or anything to go by, then you're going to think, well, the set of 15 or 12 must be better, right? Because I feel it more. And then subjectively, if you go to like 20 RM, 30 RM, then you pick up the weight, you don't feel anything. So it doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. So intuitively, I think many people gravitate towards this hypertrophy range of roughly 6 to 15 reps, typically. I think 6 to 12 is the traditional idea of the hypertrophy range. But there is no scientific basis for that. The pump is just, it's metabolic stress, but it's not the fatigue that makes you get good gains. You can get a great pump by doing partials in the mid-range, not training with full range of motion, doing exercises that only stress that part of the muscle, and then using very short rest intervals and really focusing just on that specific muscle. You get a great pump, but we know that many of these things are not conducive to maximum growth. Training with a partial range of motion, training with excessively short rest intervals, these things actually reduce muscle growth instead of increase it.
Nice. Okay, we agreed on this, on everything, and it's a good introduction to our real subject. Okay, volume is the main driver. Let's agree on that. But not only volume, the volume should be progressed, should be increased. So we're gonna talk right now about periodization, because this is the most important thing, because volume without periodization, without progressing it, you will only get gains for a few time and it will stop. So let's talk about periodization. What is periodization?
Yeah, periodization is the most pertinent form of periodization that you're referring to here is called progressive overload, that you're constantly increasing the weight on the bar. And as a result of that, you're keeping the workout intense enough. For example, if you're only doing push-ups, and this is what many people experience, you're going to get gains to a certain point, you're going to get bigger, but at some point the push-ups are just too light. You can't progress any further by just doing more push-ups. Therefore, you need more weight. And that's why gyms are popular, because we can put on more and more and more weight. So that all the workouts remain heavy enough and stimulative enough to produce maximum muscle growth. Now, periodization more generally refers to the organization of your training over time. It's a very broad term. It just refers to how you change training program variables, such as volume, over time. For example, a form of periodization that's very popular, or one of the more commonly known ones at least, is a linear periodization, which means that you're increasing the weight so fast that you're also decreasing the reps over time. And then eventually you're training near 1 RM strength. And that's a decent strategy for peaking, but it's not very effective for muscle growth purposes.
Okay, so let's focus on periodization for muscle growth, for hypertrophy. Like what are the type of periodization? What is DUP? We hear a lot about DUP, that it's really good for muscle building.
Yeah, there are lots of forms of periodization. There's cybernetic periodization, block periodization, undulating periodization, and then we have daily and weekly undulating periodization, and DUP, which you mentioned, that's daily undulating periodization. And then we, like I said, linear periodization, and then there are some more unknown ones that you generally don't hear about. But there, in principle, any form of manipulating your training program over time is a form of periodization. Now, I think DUP is one of the better ones, daily undulating periodization. It, very simply put, refers to having different rep targets or rep ranges that you work across the week. So daily refers to every time you do a workout, every day, you're using a different rep range, or at least you're alternating between at least 2 rep ranges. For example, you have a low and a high rep day for the squat, or you have a low, a medium, and a high rep day for the squat. You can do this with all exercises or only a few. And DUP is a very well-established form of periodization that works well for more advanced trainees. It produces greater strength gains in many studies and multiple meta-analyses now that have looked at all the studies together and, okay, is this really true? And they generally conclude, yes, you're going to stimulate more strength development than if you're not periodizing your program, at least for more advanced trainees. Now, there are some methodological issues, like in some of these studies, you see that they're training closer to their 1RM, and then the test of strength is a 1RM. So it's sort of training for the test. But overall, I would say that DUP is well established. It works for strength. For muscle growth, in most research, it doesn't really do much, not in the short term at least. However, or let me put it this way. There is also no clear mechanism, or even for strength development, we don't quite know yet why daily undulating periodization is so effective. It's alternating the stimulus. There is some research, but it's contradicted by other research that finds if you use different rep ranges, even though the average growth stimulus is the same, it still activates different growth pathways and causes a slightly different form of fatigue. So it may enable you to do more volume as opposed to constantly hitting your body with the exact same stimulus, which may become too much earlier. Just like doing different exercises. You know, you can, if you just only do one exercise, you're always hitting the same muscle fibers. Whereas if you do different exercises, you may hit different parts of the muscle to some extent. And it may enable you to stimulate more total hypertrophy and also to accumulate more volume without overtraining, you know, the exact fiber that you're hitting every single time. For muscle growth, it doesn't appear that that is a huge effect, but I would say that over the very long run, strength development in turn could improve muscle growth, because we know that strength development, if you get stronger, that can coincide with an increase in muscle activity. So the nervous system, the brain, the motor cortex, it learns to control your muscles better, and then you can reach higher levels of muscle activity, in particular because of the rate coding is higher. So the brain is activating the muscle fibers more rapidly in succession, and therefore you're producing more force. And that is actually an increase in active work. So that should drive more mechanical tension on the muscle fiber. So I think in the very long run, it's quite possible, and that strength development could increase muscle growth. And we have one study on this, relatively recent one, that did indeed find that people that gain more strength first and then do hypertrophy training, they gain more size on average. Oh. But other research suggests it's not a big effect.
Okay, so there is no clear thing. Like nobody will say, okay, you have to go and build strength and go to a hypertrophy block. So it's not like that. It's not 100% you have to do this. You can do both. Okay. Then I will ask you, how can you apply periodization in a mesocycle? Okay, for beginner or intermediate or advanced. Is there a difference between them? And I want to make it simple for the viewers. And we want just simple steps for them, for hypertrophy only.
Sure. If you're training for hypertrophy, you're a recreational trainee, you're reasonably advanced. Well, let's start with, if you're not advanced, if you're a beginner, then don't think about these things and just try to put more weight on the bar, train heavy. If you're trying to hit 8 reps, add more weight to the bar, try to hit 8 reps again. And as a beginner, you should probably be able to do that for some time. You should push yourself. And that's a very simple form of progressive overload. That's the simplest, oldest form of progressive overload. Just putting more weight on the bar, hitting the same number of reps every time. Now, as you get more advanced, that's going to be impossible. You can't just put more weight on the bar and you keep hitting 8 reps. If you put more weight in the bar, you can only do 6 or 7 maybe. So at that point, you can start thinking of implementing periodization. simple way to implement that is to simply stop just working at your 8 RM, but to do, for example, 2 rep targets that are at least 4 points apart. I like to use a 10% difference in training intensity. Generally, I think that's a good rule of thumb. So if you go from 80% of 1 RM, now you're going to train with 85 and 75. And then you have a higher and a lower rep day. And then you're going to alternate between those. And every time you have the higher rep day, you again try to progress. You're going to hit maybe it's now 6 reps or 5 reps, 5 reps with more weight. And you also have the higher rep day, say that's 10 reps. And now every time you have that day, you're also going to try to put weight on the bar and hit the 10 reps. So
Okay.
that instead of just the 8 RM, you're going to have 2 tracks, essentially the high and the low rep day that you're progressing on.
Can you repeat that again, because it wasn't really clear for I didn't understand it, and I don't think the viewers will understand it. Can you repeat it again, please?
Sure. A very simple way to implement periodization is to have a higher and a lower rep day.
Mhm.
So if you say now you're trying to hit your 8 RM, you're trying to do 8 reps on a squat, and you're trying to add weight and you want to hit 8 reps again. At some point, that becomes impossible. Then what you can do is you're going to have, say, a 5 and a 10 RM instead of the 8 RM. So you have one day where you're going to hit 5 reps and the other day where you're going to hit 10 reps. And you're going to alternate between those.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much it. Then you're just, every time you have the 5 RM day, that works just like what you were doing before, trying to progress and hitting, 5 reps with more weight, 5 reps with more weight, etc. But now you're alternating between the 5 and the 10 RM tracks.
And what about the advance? Is it the same as this, or there's not much difference?
Yeah, if you get more advanced, there are more things that you can do. Deloading. I like reactive deloading more, but you can have deload phases. You can also experiment with higher volume phases and lower volume phases. You can have triple undulation. So you have 3 different rep targets that you alternate between as you get more advanced. Typically, I think that's not necessary, but you can go to that level, especially for powerlifters. But overall, the principles don't change. You just want to figure out ways that you can keep implementing progressive overload in different ways.
So, what is the main differences? Because you mentioned that you always prefer to do like reactive deload. So, what is the main differences between a reactive deload and a proactive deload? And how can we apply the reactive deload in our mesocycle?
Sure. A traditional deload, like I think the most classic form of deloading is that every 4 weeks, you have 1 week where you either don't train or you train with very light weights, which are essentially warm-up level. And that's called a deload week. Now, this is proactive. People generally don't call this a proactive deload, but it is proactive because you decide in advance that you're going to do it. Like every 4 weeks, 1 week, I take it easy. Now, the problem is that you can't predict when you need this. Like you can have some idea, but there's very little research on this. And you don't know if you're going to be more stressed a certain week, if your sleep's going to be worse a certain week. So you don't know if that week you're going to have more trouble recovering than otherwise. Maybe the first 3 weeks are going great, you're making excellent progress, and then there's absolutely no need to take a week off. So you're just wasting some of your time. A reactive deload is done when your program indicates, or specifically your progression indicates, that you may be under-recovered. So if your performance is a lot worse than it should be, for example, if normally you'll always progress when you add more weight on the bar, you hit your rep target, and now you don't, but you think you should have, maybe you just put 1 more pound on the bar, 1 more kilo, and you should have hit that 8 RM again, then you can do a reactive deload, which can be the same. Either you cut the weight in half and you do some speed work, for example, or you just take the rest of the sets off. You stop more sets. Because the fact that your performance wasn't there, it means maybe you haven't recovered yet from the previous workout. So that's the signal you may be under-recovered. You actually have data to show that you may need the deload. And that's a prime difference. Another big benefit of a reactive deload is that you can do it specific to the muscles or body parts that need it. Whereas a proactive deload, you're just taking the whole week off. Maybe you had trouble progressing your squat, but your chin-ups and your bench press were doing great. Like your upper body was doing super well, but you just had some trouble in one exercise. then it makes no sense to deload the whole body, because we know that muscle growth, as we said, is caused by mechanical tension, which is a local stimulus. So muscle fatigue and muscle growth are local processes. What you do to your biceps stays in your biceps. It's like Vegas. And it's the same with many studies have looked at this. And the only thing that seems to have some possible systemic effect is if you do heavy compound exercises before upper body exercises, so squats. There is some research, it's very tentative, that indicates it may stimulate growth in the biceps. And it may have to do with the increase in hormones that you experience when you do heavy full body compound exercises. But overall, it's mostly just you train your biceps, therefore the biceps gets bigger. And if the biceps is overtrained, the biceps need some time off or some kind of deload. But your quads do not. So it makes no sense to just, if something's not progressing, to take the whole body, to rest the whole body. It's like saying, I'm injured, I have an elbow injury, therefore I'm gonna miss leg day. There's no reason not to do leg extensions just because your elbow is injured.
I mean, it's a good excuse to take some time off the gym, but it's not effective.
Yeah.
To be honest,
a lot of these things, many people want to hear it, right? Many people love to hear, okay, you can take a whole week off, feel good about yourself, you earned it, and you're still gonna grow.
To be honest, for me, because I'm a power lifter, I'm more into a proactive deload, because to be honest, most of the fatigue that I'm deloading off, it's not really a muscle issue. It's most of joint or a CNS fatigue. And to be honest, my deload is not really that big. I only follow RPE. And if I follow RPE, the load will reduce by itself. For me, I follow reactive deload in hypertrophy phases and on my clients when they are doing bodybuilding, because there aren't so much CNS fatigue like doing a 3RM or a 1RM. And this is my opinion, and I don't know what's your opinion on that.
Well, I think for joint issues, the same applies. For a powerlifter, any deload that involves the lower body is going to be more like a whole body deload, because as soon as you have a knee injury or you feel that your back is playing up, well, you're going to need to deload the deadlift and a squat and all the accessory exercises for those. So boom, yeah, that's like 2/3 of your training pretty much out. But you could probably still bench press if it really is just the knee or something. So I think it makes no sense to then deload the bench press if you're sure it's a hip issue, for example. Now for the CNS, that's actually a very contentious issue. Most research indicates that CNS fatigue is very, very short-lived. And the form of CNS fatigue that is, interestingly, the most long-lasting is associated with muscle damage, and it's still specific to the muscle. So it's specific to the motor unit. So it's actually local. Interestingly, the most common form of CNS fatigue is not central fatigue. So it doesn't affect other muscle groups.
Okay. To be honest, my schedule is really weird, because I deload the lower body maybe every 5 to 6 weeks, and the upper body every 8 or 9 weeks. It's not really indicated in the program. I just, when I feel it, it's in there. Because the week before it, there is an RPE 9 or an RPE 10 or something that will 90% make me fatigue the next week. And sometimes when I do a really heavy squat, it will affect my performance and bench press for the whole week. Like if I failed a squat or something like that, my bench press will go boom. Maybe because I use too much leg drive.
Or maybe because you're disappointed by yourself or something.
Maybe.
It could be, yeah. There are definitely mental factors involved as well. And it could be that if, for example, sleep or stress was the issue, and it affects all lifts. If all your lifts are always pushing, you to a limit, if your volume is at max recoverable, then and you don't sleep as well, then it can affect your squat and your bench press. And what you also often see is that some exercises are affected earlier, even though it is a systemic issue like sleep deprivation. You first notice it during, for example, squats or deadlifts, because when there is mental fatigue or it's only a minor issue, it's not going to play out during your biceps curls. But if you're, 2%, you're giving 2% less effort because you're mentally fatigued or tired, that's going to hurt your squat, because the squat, you have to focus on your technique. It's basically cardio if you do high reps, and then it's just super technical, many different muscle groups that are involved. Squats are just way, way harder than bicep curls. So you're probably going to recognize that you are fatigued much earlier on a squat or a deadlift, and it's certainly my experience as well, than on bench press. For some people, it seems different, but I think for most people, the heavy compound exercises, they notice the fatigue first before they notice it on, calf raises or something.
I think it's a very good point that you have mentioned, that central nervous system fatigue doesn't play as much of a big role, because people lately, I don't know if you noticed this, every time they want to talk about fatigue, they just throw CNS fatigue in there. So they're just blaming the CNS for almost everything.
My CNS is fatigued. My CNS is burned out.
Yep.
There is something that there's a lot of debate on it, is set progression and load progression in a mesocycle. What would you focus on more? Like, should I increase my sets from minimum effective volume to maximum effective volume, or more on focus on weights more and leave my sets on medium between the maximum effective and minimum effective?
I generally focus on volume progression in the sense of load. So trying to hit your rep targets with progressively more weight, or working in certain rep ranges, trying to hit 12 reps and then working from, you increase the weight, maybe now you're at 6 reps and then you're going to work back up to the 12 reps, etc. There was one recent study that found that focusing on load is more effective for, I think, both muscle growth and strength development than trying to go up in reps, but they went up in reps a lot. So they kind of took it to extremes. And I think within narrow rep ranges, it's not going to make a difference. The most important thing is that you are constantly pushing yourself and you're keeping your workouts intense. I think progressing in sets, I'm not convinced of the rationale for that. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Like, unless you're deloading for a specific reason, I don't see a reason to go back to minimum effective volume. If you can be at a certain optimum volume, then you can just stay there and you can make great progress at that level. Now, you may need to adjust the volume sometimes to find that sweet spot, because you can't just, magically say, okay, I know it's exactly 18 sets for this individual. We can make an estimate from science, but we need to fine tune that and see how someone's actually progressing, and then see, okay, every time you've taken a rest day, you come back a lot stronger than you were before. Now you have to see this in the data, right? Because a lot of people say this, but it's not actually true. I see this in my clients as well. But if you actually see it in the data, then that means, okay, maybe less volume is better. So then you decrease the volume, and again, you evaluate progression. And if you're increasing or decreasing the volume on a weekly basis, you cannot do that, because you don't know if you're constantly manipulating the volume anyway. So it becomes more difficult to figure out where that sweet spot is and evaluate progression. Plus, if you think of the body as like a system that you're imposing a stimulus on, or every muscle group essentially is its whole system that you're imposing a stimulus on, it's a certain, in a certain biochemical state, and there is a certain stimulus that evokes the most muscle growth, right? That's physics. It's not like Monday it responds better to high volume, Tuesday it's in the mood for low volume. It's just tissue, right? One of my friends, Birgit Fagerli, he said muscle is just a dumb piece of meat. It's tissue, and it responds to a stress we impose upon it in a predictable fashion. Now, there is a certain stress that we want to figure out that is the most effective to make that tissue grow. And that stress is probably going to be very similar over time, because if the muscle doesn't change, the most optimal stimulus also doesn't change, right? If that tissue has not changed in makeup, if you haven't changed the biochemistry of the tissue, it's the same muscle, the same size, then the optimal stimulus is also going to be the same. So I think the optimal stimulus will only change if the muscle has developed to a certain level. Like, if you become from beginner to advanced level, the muscle is now a lot bigger. We know in research, it's more resistant to muscle damage. It's more resistant to metabolic stress. It typically recovers faster. It has more blood vessels. So then we know, okay, that muscle probably needs a different stimulus than the one before. But I don't see any physiological rationale for why a muscle needs a different stimulus this week compared to the last week. Either we're at the wrong stimulus and we're still finding what the optimal stimulus is, or we just have to stick with the optimal stimulus.
So we don't need to shock the muscle, like they say.
No, it's funny because the muscle confusion, shocking muscle thing, that actually what you often hear is that when you're shocking the muscle so that it cannot adapt. But adaptation is the very goal of training, right? We are putting a stress on the muscle, and as an adaptation to that stress, muscle gets bigger. So the adaptation process is muscle growth. Muscle growth is the adaptation process. We don't want to avoid that. That is exactly what we're trying to stimulate.
Nice. Okay, maybe this question will answer a lot of will solve a lot of problems. Is how to avoid plateaus, how to break through plateaus. A lot of people are stuck on some kind of volume and they cannot progress on it, no matter what they do. How can they fix that?
I think one of the first things you want to do when you're plateauing in your training is to determine the extent of the plateau. Is it one exercise? And I think in general you can categorize it into three groups of plateaus. First group is that you have a whole body plateau, like nothing's progressing anymore. Now that points to a systemic cause. Then you could consider, for example, a deload week, or you should evaluate your sleep, your stress level, your diet, or overall program design. Like something overall is off. It's not to do with the progression model of an exercise. It's not to do with your technique, because it affects everything. If you go one level down, sometimes what you see is that one muscle group is progressing. For example, someone stalls on the bench press. I've seen this just now in a program that I was evaluating. A guy that stalled on the dumbbell bench press, push-ups, and the overhead press. Well, it's all similar musculature, like all pressing muscles. Front delts, upper pecs, they're involved in all of these. So probably at that point, that individual needs a different stimulus for these muscle groups. So in that case, I increased the volume because it wasn't that high yet. And I think he basically outgrew the program he was on. So that's a moment when you can increase the volume. There are some other indications that you can look at, but in general, you want to change the program for those specific muscles or those body parts. And the first plateau,
can we decrease the volume? That would be okay.
It's possible. Whether you increase or decrease the volume, there are a few things that you can look at. If someone was progressing for a long time and then plateaued, then you can probably increase it, because it means maybe they've outgrown the program. If someone already had a lot of difficulty progressing right from the start, never made good progress, and then some other things some indicators are, if after rest days they made better progress, those are indications lower volume might be better, like they may be overreaching. And their work capacity is another interesting measure you can look at, because work capacity, researchers often call it the fatigue index. Essentially, it's the amount of reps, the number of reps that you lose across sets. If you start at 12 reps and by set 4 you're at 3 reps, that's a lot of lost reps. You have 75% fatigue index, researchers would say. And if you go from 12 to 6, you have 50% fatigue index. Your reps have been cut in half. So if you have very high fatigue index or poor work capacity, however you want to call it, that's an indication that your workouts are inducing a lot of fatigue. And that means if your workouts are already inducing a lot of fatigue and now you're plateauing, it's more likely that you will do better on less volume than on more volume. Whereas if you see someone whose reps go like 12, 12, 11, 11, that's a good indication, okay, there's low fatigue. And if then they are stalling, well, I don't think they're going to do better with less volume, because they're not accumulating that much fatigue yet.
Can plateauing in performance in the gym with the weight we're using and the reps be correlated with muscle growth? Like, for example, if I'm doing less in the gym or I'm plateauing with my performance, can be that related to that I'm not growing more muscles?
Definitely. We generally see a correlation between, especially over the long term, between strength development and muscle growth. So and theoretically, we can also say, if a muscle's cross-sectional area gets bigger, then its force output should also increase, unless for some reason the nervous system becomes less efficient at activating the muscle or something. But over time, it should only get more efficient, so that shouldn't happen. So we can basically say that if you're not getting stronger, you're almost certainly not getting bigger, because if you were getting bigger, you should have gotten stronger. And I think, well, the key is long-term, right? Because anyone can get stronger on a new exercise that they've only been doing for a few weeks, especially if it's like split squats where balance is a big factor. First few weeks of progress on split squats, they don't mean you're getting jacked on jack legs and you'll be next to Tom Platz very soon. You know, it just means you've gotten better at split squats. But if you take a lifter like the Q, if you're focusing on powerlifting, I can guarantee you, if we can get your bench press up 20 kilos, then you're going to have bigger pecs, bigger triceps, bigger delts.
Yeah, of course. But I will add a rule to this, and maybe you will agree with me. If your technique does not change and you add load on your bench press, that means you build muscle. Because some people, like, they changed their form, they had a bigger arch, or they changed their leg drive, and they add 20 kilos. It doesn't mean that you built muscle. It means that you became more efficient.
This assumes that all else in the program remained the same, indeed. So if you're just changing the technique, or, you know, especially if you're changing grip width, like you're going wider and now you're stronger, it's not like, boom, you suddenly got bigger as well.
Okay. A lot of people says that we cannot periodize or progressively overload in a cut while losing weight. Is that really true?
No, definitely not. In fact, a recent meta-analysis found that energy deficit has a significantly detrimental effect on muscle growth. That shouldn't come as a surprise. It's harder to build muscle in energy deficit than in energy surplus. But it's still possible. Depends on for who, but especially for a beginner, it's absolutely possible. Intermediate trainee, if everything is set up right, it's still very possible. Very advanced trainee, it becomes very difficult. Someone that's pretty much at their natural muscular potential, no, they're definitely not going to build any more muscle in energy deficit. Bulking is the only way at that point. So it's a continuum. But strength development in the meta-analysis was actually not affected at all, or not significantly, I should say. So a big part of strength development, at least short-term strength development, is neural adaptations. If you're not making any strength gains, if your strength gains have truly plateaued and you're losing body weight, you're actually probably losing muscle. So that's a big reality check for people that they think, oh, I'm supposed to just maintain, and if I'm maintaining, I'm doing okay. No, if you're maintaining your strength, you're probably losing muscle. Because if you're doing exercises, your nervous system gets more efficient. So you should be getting at least some strength development, maybe very little. But if it's just maintaining, it generally means that any neural improvements from the body learning the movement pattern more are canceled out by something else. And that something else is probably muscle loss. So complete strength plateaus actually indicate muscle loss. Strength loss during a cut means significant muscle loss.
I think it's mostly a mental thing, as you mentioned, because some people say, especially for us Muslims in Ramadan, we have to fast for 30 days. So we get a certain type of questions. Maybe you get some of it as well from your Muslims followers, like, I'm sure that I'm gonna lose muscles and strength in Ramadan, so I should just maintain. So I think putting themselves in that mental state make them prone to stay at the same level or lose some of their strength. What do you think?
Definitely. I think there are big mental factors. And with Ramadan, of course, you have to figure out when you're training, if you're training at the end of the fast, or if you're going to be crazy and train in the middle of the night, if your gym's even open. You have to figure out those things. And if you're really dehydrated, that can also play a role. So if you're training at the end of the fast, your strength is probably going to be suppressed. And then it doesn't necessarily mean you've lost muscle. It just means that you're dehydrated, you fasted for a long time, you're probably super tired. It's hard to be super motivated at that point. So it might be temporarily suppressed, and then you'll see that after Ramadan, it goes back up again.
Okay, continue.
Sure, yeah. If you see it's plateauing, like you're trying your best, but no matter what you do, it's just plateauing and it's staying plateaued. That's probably a bad sign.
Okay. One of the funny thing that happened to me in my training years, I was 100 kg. My body weight was 100 kg, and I dropped down from 100 kg to 83 while not knowing. I had exams, I had a lot of assignment, but I didn't have any weight scale. So I didn't know that I'm losing body weight. And at that point, I built a lot of muscle. I built a lot of strength because I didn't know mentally that I'm cutting. And after that year went by, I stepped on a scale. I'm like, what? I was 100 kg. Now I'm 83. Okay, it was really obvious because now I have abs before I didn't. But still, like, because I didn't put it in my mind, that made me progress really, really good. Because dropping from 100 kg to 83 kg body weight, my bench press went from 120 kg to 145 kg. So it was like, people will not believe me because you cannot gain strength on a cut.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And funny enough, in research, we see similar things mentally when people go into energy deficit. If we look at research in which people don't know they're in energy deficit, they don't have any symptoms, their sleep isn't worse, their IQ tests remain the same, reaction times remain the same. We see this, for example, in the military. They just get rations. They're not thinking about how many calories they're on. They have rations. They go to a field exercise. They're worried about survival and doing their job, not about how many calories they have and energy deficit and those kind of things. In diets, in lab settings where people get certain gels and they have no idea what they're eating or how many calories it has, they have no symptoms. But outside the lab, when people know they're doing a diet, they complain of lethargy and fatigue and all these things. So a lot of these things are mental. And funny enough, there's a meta-analysis that tried to correlate these symptoms with the degree of weight loss, and it found no correlation, which means that some people are losing a lot of weight, so they're in a big energy deficit, and they don't have any worse symptoms than the people that aren't losing weight. And if you're not losing any weight, they're probably not even in energy deficit to begin with. So they just think they're in energy deficit, and they complain just as much as people that are losing a lot of weight.
So I think people should fix their shit first.
Yeah, fix your mental brain. Okay.
That mental definitely has a big, mindset has a big effect for sure on everything.
Yeah. Okay. It was a great episode, really, but we have to end it with a good ending. Can you tell us like a common mistakes that you see beginners or intermediates do while applying progressive overload or periodization?
I think a very big one, maybe the biggest one, especially in men, is ego lifting, sacrificing form, especially when they hear about progressive overload and I need to put more weight on the bar. And then they're doing that and they're putting the weight first. And you always want to put technique first. Like we said, if you're changing your technique, it all doesn't mean anything. If you're squatting more, but you're not squatting as deep, that means nothing. In fact, you're probably reducing the growth stimulus. In research, we see that deep squats are much better than shallow squats for muscle growth and strength development. And typically, people can only full or deep squat 1/2, sometimes only 1/3 of what they can quarter squat. So there are a lot of people who can literally cut their squat weight in half, and they're going to make better gains than they are now, just because they can go super deep, better technique. Technique should always come first. Full range of motion, safe exercise, stimulating the muscles that you want to train and not some other muscle groups. Check your ego in at the door and focus on lifting more weight, but always within the constraints of perfect technique.
Since we have covered everything, I would like to ask about your back, because I've read your post about your injury. How's it now?
Pretty much the same. I mean, it was a few days ago, so it's I think it is slowly improving with the rehab method I'm doing now. But for those listening that don't know, I have a herniated disc, at least one, and the one below also has slight bulge. And that's probably the main problem. Some specialists think there's also an anterior hernia above, but I'm not very convinced of that. In any case, it's healing very poorly, very slowly. So it's pretty bad, but I'm confident I'm going to be able to get through it without surgery.
All of us.
You will. We are both recovered disc.
Mine was L4, L5, L5S1. I had a pretty bad disc herniation. Even my doctor said I have to do a surgery, otherwise I'm not going to be able to walk. Such a jerk, right? Why would you say that to me? You know, I'm a sportsman. Like, this is my whole life. This was in 2017, but I said, I don't care. I'm going to take my chances. And I started physical therapy. In 2 weeks, I started walking again. I was almost paralyzed. I couldn't walk. I needed help from the nurse to shower as well. The MRI was quite bad. But in 2 weeks, I started walking again. In 1 month, I was back in the gym doing all the core drills and stuff. Then, in 1 year, I got back to squats, deadlifts, bench press. And this guy is the one who inspired me to go back for squatting and deadlifts because I heard his story. He has a pretty bad lower back injury as well, disc herniation. And now he is the champion of Saudi Arabia in powerlifting. So he's the strongest man in Saudi after his injury. It was both his injury. So I got inspired by him. Then I started fixing my squat, my deadlift. Now I'm doing pretty okay as well with my squats and deadlift.
Okay, to be honest, fixing my lower back was really emotional because I was living alone in the university campus, and I had the back pain 6 months. I had to deal with it alone. I was taking morphine shots. Imagine that, morphine shots. I was going to the emergency, taking morphine shots every 2 weeks to just live my life. But after researching, and that's what I learned from the internet, you have to research. I researched a lot, and after 6 months, I fixed my problem because here in Saudi Arabia, physiotherapists, most of them are not evidence-based, but some of them are.
That's not just Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, like
seems like a worldwide issue.
Yeah, it's a worldwide issue. But I fixed my back by myself, and I returned as good as ever. Before 3 months, I did have a relapse. I did have a relapse of my injury.
I've also had it.
Yeah. So I was like, I didn't worry so much. I was like, I did it before, I will do it again. I went to a physiotherapist that he lives in the United States. I had an online conversation with him, and he taught me something called PRI. I don't know if you heard about it or something. It's
PI?
called PRI. It's a breathing.
Platelet-rich injections?
No. It's a Posture Restoration Institute. It's like an institute. They teach you how to breathe, literally. So my problem was with breathing. So only in an hour, I went from 8 out of 10 pain. Right now I'm 0 out of 10 in 2 weeks.
The same for me. I'll pass you the physiotherapist Instagram later. Maybe you can have a consultation. Maybe he can add something else.
He's really good. And we want you to go back on your feet, really.
Of course.
Sure.
It was a really good episode. I thank you so much that you accepted our invitation, and we would like another episode, inshallah, in the future.
Sure, let's do it.
Maybe you come to us here in Riyadh in the
Saudi
studio,
Arabia,
right?
yeah.
Thank you very much, Mino. Make sure you follow Mino Heinselman on Instagram and check out his course. I'm currently one of his students. You're gonna learn a lot. Mino is one of my teachers in this industry, and I will stay and keep learning from him. Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to see you again.
My pleasure. See you guys.
Peace out.